Hey everyone, welcome to the That's Allowed podcast. I'm your hostess, Dr. Audrey-Ann McKeon, and today we have Lowry Olafson. Please introduce yourself.
All right. Well, I live in British Columbia. I'm a songwriter, singer, and yeah, I've been doing that for most of my life in various forms. So that's kind of how I identify from an occupational standpoint. And yeah, lover of life and adventure, and a dad. I have a 20-year-old daughter, and yeah, live in a small town on the ocean.
You are also, I will say, an inspirer.
Oh, I like it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love for you to tell the audience because I don't think they will all be familiar with what it is that you do. Can you describe what a power song is and how you help people write them?
Okay, well, power songs are basically they're like a short eight line, 8, 10 line affirmation, like a personal anthem, really, I like to think of them, uh, that I help people write, and usually takes a couple hours. And we write it really as a template about of their ideal life and what it is that they want to attract, what they want to focus on, who they want to be, what they want to have, what they want to do with their lives. And it's a tool that gets them out of their head, because the shortfall with affirmations is that we have our brains have such good bullshit detectors that if you say I'm a millionaire and you're working at Walmart, then yeah, right, get out of here. And so where power songs I found them to be more useful is that they actually get you out of your head, out of that kind of red zone, all thinking, worry, everything. It's all thinking stuff,
Yeah.
and into your body. And in your body is the blue zone, which is, peace and comfort and gratitude and, all the contentment and all of those things, where if we can get ourselves out of that cycle of anxiety and fear and self-doubt and all that stuff, um, then we can be more effective. We can stop showing up small and start showing up more fully present. And so that's what I love to do. So writing a power song really is kind of a combination of a coaching session to kind of help people get clear and help them put into words and give themselves permission to want the things they want. And then to put it in a catchy song that's fun to sing and will lift them up and take them on an emotional journey every time that is, like this, somewhere over, right? Not somewhere over the rainbow, right? The bigger version. So that's what power songs are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Music is so powerful, isn't it? It really can just kind of short circuit all that brain chatter and just get
Biggest
right.
nerve.
Yeah, just get right
Yeah.
to the heart of the emotional
Mhm.
arc of something.
Yeah, well, it changes the molecular, the chemical makeup. From what I understand, I don't know that much. I don't know really hardly anything about this stuff, but they talk about how singing together, when people sing together, that it creates oxytocin, which is the trust chemical, right? The love chemical, and that kind of stuff. And so singing, even though people maybe say, oh, well, I can't sing, or I wouldn't want anybody to hear me, or whatever, just the act of singing actually changes things. And then, the effect in apparently your vagus nerve, there's lots of science around why singing has the effect that it does, and why it's, why, John Lennon said, all you need is love, but if he'd only said it, no one would remember. But all you need is love, sung on one note, so anybody could sing it, and it's unforgettable, and and you feel it differently, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've kind of come out of focus here and I'm not quite sure why.
It's my,
There you are. There you are.
it's
You're back.
the, let's talk to Logitech about that. The Brio, it's doing that. It does it a lot.
All right, I'll write a strongly worded letter. But
Unless it's me and the camera's fine and I'm just getting blurry there.
so full disclosure, I have done this process with Lowry and it was amazing. I loved it so much. Even just the process of it was so revealing. Like you said, it really is kind of a therapy session in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty powerful. I mean, you talk about vulnerability on this show and stuff. There's such a high level of trust and vulnerability that's required, between us to create that song. And fortunately, for me, that seems to be fairly easy to reach with people because I don't know, but yeah, I loved your song. It's and maybe we'll sing it at some point, but it has these beautiful lines. Can we tell them the title?
Absolutely.
Shine Like Showtime. That's Audrian's song.
Yes, and we'll sing it at the end
Oh,
just
you
for
can
fun.
sing it. Yeah, yeah.
I'll sing it at
So
the
to
end.
Shine Like Showtime, which I think is great because you have a PhD in drama. And
Indeed, I
Showtime,
do.
so Showtime, and I just want to say a little bit about that title, why I love it so much. And whenever I write songs of any kind, I'm always, there's that whole thing about show and tell, and you don't want to, if you just tell and it's this and I feel bad or I feel good or whatever, the song's about you. But when you use, imagery and stuff like that, then the song becomes universal. It becomes about other people. And this idea about showtime, we all know what happens when it's showtime. You just, guess which version of Lowry or Audrian or whoever shows up. It's the big version, right? It's the person that's at our best, hopefully.
And that is the basics of storytelling too. You may not think of yourself as a storyteller, but what you are doing is helping people get to the real heart of their story, the story that they want to write, the story they want to
Yeah,
live in.
they want to. Yes, that's right. Yeah, good point.
Absolutely. So, speaking of stories, let's jump into my first question here. And of course, nobody ever has the right answer to this question. There is no right answer. So, just answer what comes to you. What story is the world not getting?
Oh, that's a tough question. Stories the world not getting. Um, I guess, I guess it's the whole backstory of um, how much it takes to sort of keep going.
Mm,
I think as a to keep well to first to find something, find the things that that are really um, that work on a lot of levels, work on all levels really, because that's what we're headed for, we're aiming for. Is like this works on every level. It's in terms of an occupation, for instance, with power songs, for me, it works on a lot of levels because I love the idea of transformation and helping people get unstuck and to live there. Stop saying no, I could never do that. I could, but to say, hey, yes, But also, I love songwriting, and I've done a lot of it. So, now, and I've done a lot of facilitating and stuff. So now I'm pretty well. You know how opinionated I am about words and certain things, and um, but with good reason. John Lennon didn't say all you require is love, blah blah blah, right? Like, there's a reason that we follow these rules sometimes, right?
mhm.
um, so yeah, just finding all those things, and then building a business, and finding clients that you want to work with, and you know that want to work with you, and people that trust you, and all that stuff. So I'd say, yeah, just the whole backstory of I mean, I'm 67 years old, so and I don't have any intention of quitting anytime soon. So I think that's probably the thing people don't know.
Yeah, and we'll get back to that in just one moment. But I want to talk a little bit about you started talking about, limiting beliefs and the limitations that they put on themselves. I want to talk about that because that's such an important thing. People think, oh, well, if I have something that works on one level or two levels, like maybe I'm really good at this thing, or people see me as being really good at this thing, then that's enough.
Hmm.
Or, I really enjoy this, but it doesn't, pay anything. Like people think that's enough.
Right.
How do you help people to kind of get out of that mindset of like one or two things is enough and help them really find that thing that works on multiple levels?
Well, I suppose uh, I think people kind of find it in terms of their own songs. I think that they find it on a bunch of levels. Like, because the songs are so short, we really want to trigger. I send them a deep dive questionnaire,
Mhm.
so I get them thinking about a lot of different areas in their life in terms of what brings them the joy and what are their concerns, and all that kind of stuff. Um, so in some ways, you don't necessarily look at all the details of things, but if you say, like in my power song, I have a line that goes, um, how's it go? I'm living in the flow, helping people grow. That's one of the
Mhm.
lines in my song. And so for me, living in the flow, which is really funny because now I've gotten everybody I think is quite interested in flow research these days and how you can do more of that. And I didn't even realize I had this word in there until, a year and a half, 2 years later. Right. But to me, what that's about is um, just paying attention to all the details. For instance, if you had a job when you were really curious and it really grabbed your attention, but there was some really mundane part of the job that you hated. Like I had a friend who had a degree in science and went all the way through that and loved it. And then when she found out that she was going to be spending her days looking at a microscope all day, it's like, I don't want to do this like this. So she changed, right? And so those kinds of details are the sorts of things that we may not think about them, but you become aware um, pretty fast when you're in them. It's like, I don't like this part of the job. Like, I don't really want to drive 7 hours every day after I do an 8-hour show in a school, right? And the cold in Saskatchewan in the winter. I don't really want this part of the job, right? So it's just, I think basically I just want everything.
Well, what you put up with, you end up with, right? So
Right.
you really have to be careful what you will accept.
Yes, that's great. I love that line.
Yeah. So, a couple of things you brought up that I wanted to unpack here before we dive into your journey, your kind of hero's journey. So you talked about the questionnaire that you send out in advance. I have one of those too, and I think it is so important. You've seen mine now, but
I
I think
have.
when you get people to ask themselves those questions, not even seeing the answer, I think it
Mhm.
opens them up to the process
Yeah,
so much more. I think,
absolutely.
I think it was Picasso who said, computers are useless, they can only give you answers. Because questions can be so important.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's like kids that keep asking why, another layer of why. And why is that
Yeah.
important? Why do you want that? Right?
Yeah, and never stop asking why. Curiosity
Yeah.
is so
Well, it's
important.
it's one of the essential ingredients in flow is
Yeah.
curiosity, right? So yeah, so you never, literally never stop asking why.
Yeah. And then you were talking about how you put the word flow into your song without realizing it. I think that one of the beautiful things about the power song process is that it does help us tap into our subconscious by looking at these images and thinking about, this like the visualization exercise that I always like to do on my podcast. I think it really gets people into, out of that headspace and into their
Mhm.
heart space and just connecting with their subconscious.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, good songs to me are very visual, very sensory. Yeah, not just visual, because the whole sensory thing, right? Is it's pretty powerful. To not just think. Thinking is so dangerous or so ineffective, right? I don't know.
It can be dangerous. Absolutely. We can
Yeah.
rationalize and justify all kinds of things to
Oh, and
ourselves.
like obsess and
Oh,
brood and
ruminate.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's take you back to a time when you were struggling. When
Which time? Yeah.
if we can kind of think about, the fullness of your journey to where you are now. Um, Everyone has a kind of hero's journey where they started in a place where, if everything seemed kind of normal to them because that's the all that they knew. But they started to realize at some point that they were different or that something wasn't quite fitting in the place that they were at and that they needed to kind of separate themselves from that community or from that place or from that mindset. So where did you would you say was the beginning for you when you just started to realize like, hey, something's not quite fitting here?
I don't know if I ever thought that. I think I just had, I always wanted to be a singer, a performer,
Mhm.
songwriter. I always wanted to do that since I was a little kid. Um, I think my journey wasn't so much that I didn't fit in. Well, I think what I felt, um, it just put me up to a lot of self-doubt, that, at first it was kind of like, when you're a kid and you're doing that, everybody's write a song and everybody's just gaga and it's so great and you think you're so talented. And I know perfectly well that when the Beatles came out, my songs were just as good. However, I wasn't recognized in the same way for some reason. you know, like you don't know what you don't know, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, so I kind of had that journey all through until high school, and then I thought that's what I would what I would do, and then my dad said, well, there's not much of a way to make a living, and that just kind of fizzled out, and so that dream just kind of like I just almost kind of it's weird how you it's almost like you latch onto these things that people say, because if my dad had said, oh yeah, you're totally going to make it, I might not have latched onto it. I might not remember that, because I think he spoke to my own doubt about my ability. And then so much of that sense of success is about being discovered, or it's up to other people. You write a song and it's up to other people, whether you don't really even know what a good song is. And quite frankly, I think I only discovered like 15 years ago or less why some of my songs worked and some don't, because just because of like using century language and stuff like that. And so um there was a just kind of a sense of powerlessness that went with the whole thing. And then it's a competitive business, and um trying to get into, as a performer, trying to get into folk festivals where they have 1,200 applications for 30 things, and it's you take it personally. You think you're no good or stuff like that. But so my approach was always I like the independent route, because then I could do what I wanted, and I could build it even if it was small. At least it was my songs on my terms. And I almost had a bit of a kind of a you saw it as a bit of a challenge in a way, because could I actually, without a record deal, without this, could I still record albums? Could I still build a following? Could I still travel? And I did. I did 9 albums. So that's a lot of songs and a lot of years of touring and stuff.
Yeah, I want to talk for a moment about that general attitude in the world that artists will never make a living at it, or it's, an impossible dream. I know when I was younger, I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be like, whenever someone would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd say Miss Piggy. That was my that was my icon. I wanted to be
Really?
a big glamorous movie star. Uh, also a
Not
Muppet.
that glamorous, except
Right.
in her own mind, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my dad was always the practical one. He was a scientist, he was an electrical engineer, and so he was the first one to kind of poo-poo my ideas. And I remember, when I went off to college, he gave me this kind of speech where he was like, it's all well and good to, follow your dreams and blah blah blah, but you also have to have, some practicality in there. Like, you have to get some skills that people will actually pay for. And I was like, okay, that's fair enough. So instead of going to a conservatory, I went to a liberal arts college, and I got a kind of broad-based education. But I ended up majoring in theater and French. And I remember my dad calling me up and going, is that what you got from, what we discussed? Like, is this really like, what are you going to do with that? Is what he
No.
kept asking, what do you plan to do with that? My dad's English. And I was like, I don't know what I would do with anything at this point, like I don't know
Yeah.
what I want to do. And when I finished college, I got a Fulbright scholarship to go and study French speaking African theater. And so I remember, the day when I called my dad and I was like, "Well, Dad, this is what I'm doing with it."
Holy cow! Where did you go? Where did you study that?
So I went to basically all of West Africa, where they speak French, all of Francophone West
Wow.
Africa. So Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Mali, that whole area, but mostly
Unreal.
Cote
Holy
d'Ivoire.
cow.
Yeah, I wrote a whole book about it. But anyway, uh,
Wow.
so let's continue with your journey. So you were, living the life as an artist. You were getting some success, but
Well, yeah. Um, but I think I always felt like, and maybe it was some kind of the the coaching I got too was around, being a folk singer isn't really much of a living, and there's, a lot of competition for that whole thing. And how can you, do niche marketing? That was kind of the thing.
Right.
So, so I had an opportunity to write. I was invited to come and do a presentation on songwriting in a school one time when I was doing, coming in to play a concert for the Arts Council. And so instead of just talking about it, I thought, okay, we'll write a song together with the kids. And so we did, and we wrote this fun song called I Slept In, and the kids loved it. And it was, great experience. But basically nobody ever got to hear the song because this was about 2005 maybe.
Hmm.
So, it was like you make a cassette of it or something, and then, you can't duplicate it. You can't,
Right.
those things weren't in place. But so eventually when I got a few more of those things, I thought I need to, and the kids, yeah, nobody heard the kids song. And so it was kind of a drag because the songs were good, you know, and, and the kids were proud of them and stuff. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to start doing a concert after lunch for the whole school, and then the kids will perform their song for everybody, and then we'll teach the song to the whole school. And but I wasn't a kids entertainer by any means, and they just ate me alive at first, and it was really bad. um, but I didn't really have the repertoire, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just start singing the songs the kids are writing, like that'll be my repertoire. So we're doing now, all of a sudden, My Dog Ate My Homework, and 21 Ways to Bug Your Teacher, and Fun the Funky Chicken and stuff like that. And it turned into eventually into a pretty fun show. um, and I did, over 400 of them all over Western Canada, and I got good at it. But what I uh, and it gave me income that my folk singer friends weren't getting,
Mm.
stable income. Like through the week, you work a 5-day week. One month I think I did 22 songs, and in the winter in Saskatchewan. And it was just like, um, if you're playing gigs, you'd be lucky to work 3 nights or 4 nights of the week, and get paid hardly anything, and stuff like that. But it was also like what I it was so challenging. It was just so hard.
Yeah.
And I was so intimidated by the whole experience, and by the principles, and by, coming into schools and having to kind of like wear so many hats in one day, from writing the song to, managing the kids, to doing the recording, to, getting it on the internet, to setting up the PA in the gym, and then, changing because, doing all these crazy things, just, and then driving, like I said, to the next town, and in the dark in the winter.
Yeah.
Just, it was like everything from road manager to, you know but what was really interesting to me about, and maybe this was, for you too, is that it was not about being a star.
Hmm.
Like the thing for that, um not that I wouldn't have liked that, and had to have the adulation and the limousines, right? But it wasn't, it took it out of the thing about being a star, is that it's out of your control. It's all up to everybody else, right? And that includes a certain amount of luck. um but it's really out of your hands, right? You put out the stuff, and maybe people will buy this. I mean, poor old, what's his name, that wrote Achy Breaky Heart, that song? I
Hmm.
mean, that guy's written lots of great songs, and that's the one that hits. Miley Cyrus's dad, Billy Ray Cyrus, right?
Yeah.
So you have no control over those things. But what this did was it kind of put things, to some degree. It was like I had some control, at least, that I could make income. I had very clear expectations, and it was like a big challenge every day. A big challenge. It wasn't like doing a concert. And if anything, that's kind of how I feel now about doing shows. I still have lots of songs I love performing, and I love sharing my songs, but it's not that challenging. you know it's fun, but this stuff's like every time I write a power song, it's like, it requires my full attention.
But it's the kind of challenge you enjoy, not the
I
kind of
enjoy
challenge
it.
that.
I enjoy, and I've recognized that you need that 4%. That's what they say to get into flow. You want to be 4% above your skill capability. So just a little bit, enough to get you focused. You got skin in the game. You're not sitting back. here. It's, yeah, but those are the, so what happens is when you live your life that way, when there's so much growth and so much challenge all the time, I had to really learn how to manage my energy and eat strategically. I was all about, okay, how can I survive this? Because, I just got 1 year, I got, the first year I got 14 schools booked it. And I thought, oh God, I was hard enough to do one, how can I do this? And next year, 85 schools booked it. And I'm thinking, I can't possibly do this. This,
Yeah.
and yet you have to do it. And so you just kind of start developing the systems and you grow in, you just grow like there's no tomorrow when you challenge yourself a lot, right? You step but and everything. And then I started doing it with nonprofits and with businesses and writing theme songs for them and audio branding, and like the thing would grow. Um, and I just, I grew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you grew by challenging yourself, by keeping yourself at that 4%.
Yeah. Well, I grew because I needed the money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, switches, and that's an external, that's called an external, whatever it is, motivation, as opposed to internal motivation. So external motivation is valuable to a point, money, fame, all that stuff. But it's not very motivating. What's really motivating is curiosity and passion and meaning and mastery and autonomy. Those
Yeah.
are the things. When you can find those things in your work, then you just want to get up in the morning. Hey, guess what I get to do today? I get to write a song with Adrian. How fun is that going to be?
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. Yeah, meaning. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Meaning is far more motivating than any of those external
Mm,
factors. I
yeah.
will say, I think, those external factors too, once you get, one or two of those, you realize that without that meaning behind it,
Oh
it
yeah.
is, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
It's a disaster. It's,
Yeah.
it's not just empty, it's actually problematic,
Oh God, yeah. I played in the bars for a couple of years. Somebody said, "Oh, you never make any money, Lowry, playing your own stuff. You should get, learn some top 40 and get a drum machine, start playing the bars."
Mm-hmm.
I was ready to slit my wrists by the time I did that for 2.5 years. I didn't care if I never played guitar again.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, it was not the. I mean, even though I was playing music every night, getting paid, you
Yeah.
know, yeah.
So, quick sidebar. When I was in Africa, one of the things that happened is I was on this music video that it became a huge hit. And I, was like the where's the beef lady. I was just this weird sort of novelty that people were kind of, obsessed with for a while. And
Wow.
so I became a celebrity. And it was a very strange and not pleasant experience,
Hmm.
actually,
Hmm.
because suddenly everyone has their idea about what you are and they have this projection onto you and they feel like they know you because you've like been in their home.
Right.
And so it's like you're their best friend, but you have no idea who these people are. And they come up to you like you owe them something, just for being in the space and not like speaking to them.
Yeah.
And it can be really scary and it can be really disturbing. And people can be angry with you about stuff that was written in the tabloids that you don't even know what it is.
Wow.
Uh, yeah. And what I discovered from that experience is that, what I really want is to earn the respect of people that I respect and not necessarily just to be known, by random strangers on the street. That's actually not as fun as it sounds.
Well, actually, it's funny you use that word because I wrote a power song yesterday with this really wonderful woman. I have to introduce you to her, Annie Ruggles. She does a sales course. She's actually has a degree in musical theater,
Oh,
but she
cool.
has this thing, does a sales course, non-sleazy sales for empaths.
That's
And
great.
she's just a hoot. She's wonderful. But she said, I don't want to be famous, she said, but I want to be known.
Hmm.
And known, like, to me, then those people didn't know you.
Right.
they they
Right.
they'd
They
heard of you.
projected.
They'd done that, right, but they didn't know you, right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so it really gave me, I loved that sort of clarification on her part, right.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. I love
Yeah.
that. So, what was the moment where you discovered power songs?
Well, I was going through a divorce about 3 years ago, and my life was kind of, going, getting all refigured out and stuff like that. And somebody said, well, why don't you do affirmations? And I said, oh, I've done them. They don't work, you know. And they said, well, why don't you write a song then? And so I did. I thought, okay, oh, why not? So I'll write this song. So I wrote this song that went, I got a house on the water and someone to love. I laugh and sing and work and play. I'm living in the flow, helping people grow. Joy and adventure every day. And it felt stupid, you know, because I didn't have a house on the ocean. It's like a lifelong dream I've had. My last place was, we had a view of the ocean, and it was an old house that I'd spent, you know, a lot of time renovating and, you know, turning into something. But I always said, you know, the only thing that would get me out of here would be to live right on the ocean, and that's what I always wanted. But in the process of singing this song, um, I started to get some ideas. It's like, oh, well, actually, you know, my sister and brother-in-law they used to have this place, you know, land on the ocean, and I made them buy it 16 years ago, and they haven't developed it. And they, you know, and they don't really have the skills or the capability to do that on their own. I wonder if, you know, I took my equity and we could build something together. And so we did. We built a house, and I have the top floor, my own space, my own, you know, kind of apartment, and they have theirs, and it's like, here it is. And then, you know, over the course of that, it meant I had to, you know, work with, help creating the design, and I had to work with the construction company and kind of, you know, participate in that stuff, uh, as you know, as it went down. But um, but I was willing to do that, you know, and it was a good thing I did that, because, you know, we got more of what we wanted. But it was, I still had, even when I moved in though, I just felt like so guilty. Like, who am I to have a house on the ocean? You know, I'm a folk singer that, you know, I mean, I don't even own a car. You know, I got a bicycle, right? It's, and yet here it is. And I felt guilty, you know, and I had to, like, okay, no, we're not going there. I'm not staying in guilty. I'm going into
Mm.
gratitude, and, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, and all this stuff. And then, you know, I've had a beautiful relationship with you know, a wonderful woman for the last couple of years. And then, you know, the work. So then I didn't necessarily have as much work as I wanted. I was doing motivational speaking, and I have a talk with songs in it and stuff, which, you know, was good, but it wasn't getting much traction. It was a hard sell. And there was things about it I didn't like that much, because I only got to sing 4 songs, and, you know, the rest talking. And um, so uh, yeah, so anyway, I was talking about this on a call last year about the results from singing the song, and about 5 people said, I want a power song. And so I said, okay, well, I'll write one with each of you guys, and we'll see how it works out, and you can give me testimonials. So it goes. Well, they all loved their songs, and they're still singing them like crazy all the time, and seeing, you know, seeing their lives kind of move in the direction that they want to, and they have this tool to uplift them. And so last year I ended up writing about 40 of them. I did, when COVID hit, I was already doing stuff on Zoom, so it didn't matter to me. And you know, I built a website and did all that stuff, and so really, um, yeah. So now I'm just like working from home, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I love that talk, you know, you talking about the shift from guilt to gratitude.
yeah.
That's such an important shift. One of the things I've noticed, especially with women, is that we have a tendency to say "I'm sorry" a lot. Like
I'm
to
sorry to hear that.
yeah, like we just
Yeah,
apologize
yeah,
endlessly for
huh,
things
yeah,
that aren't even something we should apologize for. Like my mom, bless her, every time she bumps into an inanimate object, she says, "I'm sorry." Like the
yeah.
object can't hear you. And so, one of the things I've challenged myself to do in the last couple of years is whenever I feel like saying I'm sorry, to instead turn it into a thank you. So instead of, I'm sorry I'm late, thank you so much for your patience. I really
Wow,
appreciate you waiting for me.
that's brilliant.
It's amazing the shift that that has made in my life. So this is just a little takeaway for the audience here. If you can get from guilt to gratitude, that is such an important mind
Um,
shift.
what if they weren't patient? What if they were annoyed that you were late? Does
You
that
know,
negate their experience?
you can still just say thank you for waiting, you know,
That's
if they're
true.
still
Thank you
there.
for waiting.
Yeah.
No
you know?
apology.
Yeah,
I think
just
I'd still
thank
want to
you.
say, sorry, I'm
I
late.
appreciate you putting up with me.
Well, it is an interesting one because I sure find that a lot with power songs, that it's one thing for people, the first step is to get clear about what you want. The second one is to give yourself permission to have it. People that are
Yes.
talking about love and I've written songs with people that are getting older, and they're single, and they're thinking, how am I to have love in my life? What are the chances of that? But and I don't necessarily say that you have to put a line in that says, and I have a beautiful girlfriend or I have a beautiful boyfriend or something. But I did write a line that I really loved in a song with a woman that went, loving deeply, deeply loved. Right. And so whatever, even if it didn't manifest as a partner, that sense of being loved could be met, that
Yeah.
we can meet these needs. Sometimes it isn't, it might not be a Rolls Royce you need, right? Frozen.
Sorry,
Oh,
you
maybe I'll
froze
be
up
back.
there. Yeah. My internet's been a little unstable today. Sorry about that. Let's give it a
Oh,
moment.
thank you for your patience.
Yes. And thank you for yours. Yeah, so I I had something and now it's gone. So what were you talking about when you froze up there?
That's a good question. I was talking about loving deeply, deeply loved. I was talking about
Yeah.
putting things into your
Ah,
songs
yes.
that you don't think you deserve or you don't think
Right.
are likely. Like, interestingly, one of the things I heard recently from this guy Stephen Kotler, who's founded the Flow Research Collective, and he's talking about how this idea of SMART goals, specific, measurable, and then the A is friends for attainable, and they don't believe in that A.
Mhm.
That's a total no-no, that you have to have goals that are attainable, because what happens with certain things is that the growth is exponential. It's like compound interest, that you have this business and you do this thing and nothing seems to happen, and these are the times when people quit.
Yeah.
But Elon Musk could never have imagined that he was going to send something to Mars. Jeff Bezos, these guys, they couldn't have imagined the effect of the compounding effect of just coming at it and doing this work and with focus all
Yeah.
the time. So I love that. I mean, to me, the idea that I was going to have a house on the ocean is was just ludicrous. I was
Yeah.
what I was picturing myself in a trailer in the woods. Really, when that marriage ended, I was like, this is, my friends were saying, Lowry, this is, you're going to lose everything. This is going to be the way it is. And I just said, well, even if it's a trailer in the woods, it's going to be better than what I'm living with right now.
Mhm.
And I'll make it a nice trailer. I'll fix it up and I'll have the sun pouring in, and whatever I do, it's going to be beautiful. Because to me, the most important thing have a when I think about where I want to live, I always do these, those lists. You might do those, list of all the qualities you want in a place. Well, the top of my list is inspiring,
Mm.
right? So whether it's a 2 bedroom or a 10 bedroom or no bedroom, the top of the list is inspiring. So,
Yeah, I think
light, those sorts of things, right?
I would, take that attainable out and put in audacious, because I
Yes,
think people get really caught up in the idea of, they say what's possible, but what they mean is what's probable, because
exactly.
anything's possible,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, sure, there are some things that are more probable than others, but do you really want to focus your energy on what is expected, what you already expect to happen, you know?
Yeah, well, and what happens is that if you can't get your head around it, then uh, if you can only see yourself doubling your income, then that's all you're going to do. You will only take the actions to create doing that. If you can see
Right.
yourself, 10 timesing it, then you'll take the actions to do that. And if you can imagine yourself 100 times, well, then it's a completely different set of actions that are required. So if you want to live on a house on the ocean, then it's a different set of actions that is required if you want to get a room in the apartment down the street with a buddy. right?
Absolutely.
So so it's that's why it's important, because it determines the actions that you'll take. Because this kind of woo stuff that we all get into about manifesting and all that kind of stuff, it only goes so far. It's the reality is you got to show up, and you have to, and I think that's where gratitude is, um is so important. Well, one, because it opens up your filters to other, otherwise you have a very narrow kind of view of what's possible. And that's why affirmations don't work, because they just say, oh yeah, right, you're a millionaire. But with gratitude, you say, thank you for the food in the fridge, thank you for this beautiful day, thank you for all this love I have in my life, thank you for this. And all of a sudden you're sort of seeing things. Literally, you can feel a shift in your vision, right? That narrow feeling when your eyes almost feel hard, and then you soften them, and you look around, and you're just like, oh my God, look where, it's a physical experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, that's a perfect transition. Do you want to do my little exercise that I like to take people through here?
sure.
Okay.
Good.
So we're going to close our eyes and take a couple of nice deep breaths. There we go. And as you breathe in this time, I want you to see colored light coming into your body. And then tell me what color it was.
Hmm. Oh, I'm never good at this. I'm going to say purple oak because I like that one.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to see some purple light coming into me because I like purple too.
Okay.
Mm. Yeah, that feels good. So I'm going to go ahead and wave my magic wand over here. And now everything that you deeply desire has come to pass. It is all here, it is all now. And I want you to, without opening your eyes, because I want you to kind of stay in visualization mode, wake up in this ideal reality and tell me what you see.
Hmm. I'm kind of where I am. I feel like
Hmm.
I feel like it. I think I'd have more people around, more friends, more kids, more, more life, more joy. Um,
So I want you to hear those voices in the house. You're here where you are, but you can hear people kind of playing, laughing, talking in another part of the house. And you can smell good smells coming from somewhere.
hmm.
What do you smell?
Oh yeah, stuff being cooked.
Hmm.
Definitely beautiful aromas coming out of the off the stove and out of the oven. And yeah,
Let's get some specifics. What do you smell?
what do I smell? I don't know. How about we could have a really nice, uh, maybe chicken dinner kind of
Hmm.
thing, maybe some chocolate chip cookies,
That's a
looking
strong
really
smell.
nice, some, oh, an apple pie. An apple
There we go.
pie it is, yeah.
Okay, so you can smell that apple pie, fresh baked apple pie getting taken out of the oven.
Mm-hmm.
You know that that was prepared with love just for you
Mm-hmm.
by people who care so deeply about you.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just finished writing a power song with someone, and they are in that elated state where they've just made this breakthrough, and you can see it that it's really, really broken through for them. And I want you to hear them tell you how much this has meant to you.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that feel like?
Oh, very satisfying and um, thrilling.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Now I want you
and,
to,
and deep and deeply meaningful.
yeah, I want you to go someplace which is kind of your happy place where you really feel completely free and completely yourself. Where do you go?
Out in my rowboat.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you're out on the water. Just describe, you can hear the sounds of the water as you're rowing, that lovely sound of the oars pushing through the water.
Mhm.
What else can you hear out there?
You can hear the gulls and the um, creaking of the oars for sure. Yeah,
Mhm.
gulls screaming and squawking away, and uh, probably don't hear much from the seals. But yeah, just the bird life. Maybe if you're lucky, an eagle.
Well, you're very lucky today. So I
Yeah.
want you to hear exactly what you'd
Okay.
love to hear
There's
out there.
eagles there, and you can hear the wind a little bit, just a gentle wind. And if I have somebody in the boat with me, maybe there's some gentle conversation or some laughter.
Mhm. There is. And let's say this person brings you some wonderful, unexpected news, something you just hadn't anticipated, but just absolutely makes your day and maybe even your week.
Hmm.
What is it?
Hmm. Usually that's about getting work of some kind for me.
There you go. So you've just gotten a just a delightful, unexpected gig that's going to bring you more money than you had anticipated and just be an absolute joy and delight.
Hmm.
What are you going to do to celebrate?
I think we'll go over to, we're going to head over to Keats Island, over to maybe go to a far island, go all the way to
Mm.
one of the further islands and have a picnic, have happy hour on the beach, hang out all afternoon, watch the sun go down, and then row back by moonlight in the
Beautiful.
seamless. Yeah.
Beautiful. All
Mhm.
right. Open your eyes, please. That was wonderful.
That was fun. Let's do it again.
I know, right?
Yeah.
What I always recommend after that is that, people try to find some images that kind of matched with what they saw and make a little slideshow for themselves.
Mm,
Um, you can, of course, record your song over top of it and make a little music video for yourself.
great.
Yeah, and that would be a fun
Yeah.
thing to listen to and watch
Yeah.
first thing in
Cool.
the morning, I recommend.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thanks. Buddy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you bet. All right. So where can the folks at home find you and get their own power song?
Oh, powersongs.ca. Yeah, everything on the website that you can, they can have, there's a button, let's chat. You can have a free 20-minute call just to, if you have questions or if you wanted to find out about, ways that you could use it, or um, just to connect with me and see if it feels like it's a fit. So at powersongs.ca, that's probably the easiest way. Otherwise, yeah, you can email me, and my phone number might even be on there somewhere. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks so much, Irene. That was very fun.